to kick off the 2023 Borlaug Dialogue, please welcome to the stage the Honorable former Governor of Iowa and present U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack.
Well, I certainly want to thank the Ambassador for not just an introduction, but for a lifetime of service to our great state here in Iowa and to the country and the world for the work that he did as Ambassador in China. No one is a greater advocate for food security for all than Terry Branstad. Also want to acknowledge the World Food Prize laureate, Heidi Kuhn, and her Roots of Peace. What a great honor to acknowledge the important work of those who are dealing with redemption and resurrection, if you will, after conflict. It's especially appropriate at this point in time in our history as we deal with so many challenges across the world. And it was appropriate for the World Food Prize Foundation to acknowledge her commitment and her effort over a lifetime of trying to make peace from when there was war. Certainly want to thank as well the Borlaug and Ruan families. You know, as I was thinking about Norman Borlaug today, it occurred to me that he was a man who believed very, very, very much in the power of science. When you talk about harnessing change, he was a change agent. He was someone who understood that when you have a problem, that you have a responsibility to find the solution. And the Ruan family, both Ruan Sr., John Ruan Sr. and John Ruan III, and the entire Ruan family, understood and appreciated the importance of lifting up those who are engaged in harnessing change by essentially providing the resources to bring the World Food Prize to Iowa. Ambassador Quinn has been mentioned as certainly an individual who led this effort in this foundation for so many years and really helped to expand its reach significantly beyond its early days. So it's been a collaboration and a partnership of individuals who understood the significance of science and understood the importance of lifting science up and rewarding those who make a difference in the world. And certainly the notion of this dialogue today of harnessing change is certainly timely, given the conflict that we see in various parts of the world. Conflict that gets the nightly news, and then conflict that often is ignored but yet impacts and affects people in a real way. That creates a humanitarian crisis that requires those of us who are able to respond. Whether it's in Gaza or whether it's in Ukraine or anywhere else in the world, we are called to a responsibility and a call to action to harness change and to provide assistance and help as a result of the challenges that conflict creates. And we're certainly called as a humankind to respond to the crisis of climate. There is no question that it is impacting and affecting the way in which we live and will continue to do so. And agriculture, in particular, has, I think, an important role to play in responding to this growing crisis. So it is appropriate for this dialogue to be focused on change, on harnessing change. But, you know, to do so, let me begin by suggesting that to do so, first and foremost, you have to have full stomachs. It's pretty hard and pretty difficult to harness change, to harness anything, if you're hungry. So it is important and necessary for countries like America to acknowledge and respond to a growing number of people around the world who find themselves food insecure and nutrition insecure. Clearly, we were on the right course of action prior to COVID. We saw a decline in the number of those who were suffering from food insecurity. But as a result of COVID and as a result of conflict and as a result of climate, we now find ourselves in a world where there's an increasing number of those who suffer from food insecurity. So it is important and necessary for a country like the United States to respond. Fortunately, there was another visionary, a fellow by the name of Henry Wallace, who happens to be an Iowan, who decided that the Department of Agriculture should have tools to be able to respond to changing circumstances. And during the Great Depression in the 1930s, he established, with Franklin Roosevelt's leadership, the Commodity Credit Corporation, which essentially provides the Department of Agriculture resources to respond to crisis. And today we announced the availability of $1 billion from that Commodity Credit Corporation that will be used to purchase commodities that we will work in collaboration with USAID to ensure that they go to countries that are in need to be able to begin the process of alleviating some of the food insecurity that we see as a result of the various challenges that are facing. This is a step in the right direction. To harness change, you have to understand change. You have to understand what it is you're going to try to change. And it brings me to a discussion of climate. I think we all know that the climate is in fact changing. We all know that it's impacting and affecting where and how and what we're going to raise in terms of agricultural production. The question is, do we know what works? Do we know what can reduce greenhouse gas emissions connected to agriculture? Do we know what works in terms of being able to sequester more carbon? Do we know what can get agriculture both here in the United States and globally to a net zero future? Can we use agriculture as an example for other industries to commit itself to a climate adaptation and mitigation agenda? Well, it seems to me that first and foremost, we have to recognize that we think we know. We don't, in fact, know what works in terms of agriculture. We think we understand and appreciate steps and practices that could potentially be helpful. So it is again incumbent upon the United States and other developed nations to begin a process of figuring out how to go about determining what, in fact, does work. So we launched, again with the Commodity Credit Corporation, resources now available to producers in all 50 states in over 90 commodities, over 170 practices that we believe or think might be effective in terms of adapting and mitigating to a changing climate. This is a program that we've established in 141 projects across the United States. It is voluntary, so producers can engage and embrace in this practice. It is market-driven in the sense that we are going to provide resources and incentives for farmers to embrace these climate-smart practices that we think will work. And then we have partners. We have major retailers, major food processing companies that have committed to essentially paying a premium for these commodities in an effort to try to create a structure in order to essentially harness the change of climate to become a more effective vehicle in terms of sustainable and regenerative agriculture. We're excited about this opportunity. We expect and anticipate, when it's fully implemented, that maybe as many as 60,000 U.S. farmers will participate in over 25 million acres in this effort. Now, one of the key components to this is extraordinary partnerships. I mentioned a few with major retailers and major food processing companies, but there are also significant commodity groups, farm groups, conservation groups, environmental groups, land-grant universities, as well as minority-serving institutions, all working collaboratively together to look at a variety of practices and strategies for how we might be able to get agriculture to a net zero future. For example, there is a methane reduction strategy that is being applied to rice in the southern part of our country. A new irrigation system that might, in fact, reduce methane that is produced during rice production. There are several projects involving local dairies in an effort to try to convert the manure from those dairy operations and the methane produced from them and creating a wide variety of new bioproducts. There's a project that is looking at developing feedstocks for sustainable aviation fuel so that we have low carbon fuel. While I understand and appreciate electric vehicles, battery wears out, you pull to the side of the road, you call somebody, you get a charge, off you go. I'm not as convinced about being in a battery-powered plane, especially if that plane's over water. So it's going to be necessary and important for us to have a sustainable low-carbon fuel for our aviation and marine industry globally. It's a huge opportunity for farmers and for a net zero future for agriculture. There are a wide variety of projects involving renewable energy production on the farm and embracing regenerative practices. The key here, of course, is that we are able to measure, to monitor, to verify, and to report the results of each one of these practices. Now, that's important because that's how we're going to know what we know. That's going to be important in terms of how we know how to invest additional resources that will become available through a number of legislative enactments, including the Inflation Reduction Act. Nearly $19 billion of additional resources for conservation can go to essentially provide greater incentives and momentum for this science-based effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, sequester carbon, and get to agriculture to a net zero future. Now, in order to do that, we have to be able to know precisely how to measure. That is not necessarily a simple proposition. And as we look at this dialogue of harnessing change, it's going to be necessary for us to have the tools, the models, the knowledge to be able to understand more fully how best to measure and monitor. We know that there are some challenges. We know that we need more soil carbon monitoring. We know that we need greater research on greenhouse gas emissions. We know that we need to expand data management and utilizing new technologies like AI effectively. We know that we have to improve those models and tools with this new information. We know that we have to improve our conservation standards. We know that we have to improve our temporal and spatial coverage for our national conservation programs. And we know we have to strengthen our inventory, all of which is important and necessary in order for us to appreciate how best to adapt and mitigate to a changing climate in terms of agriculture. None of this works. None of this works unless we're willing to share it with the world. And that's why it was important for us, as part of our world and international effort, in our Aim for Climate initiative, which was launched several COPs ago with the United Arab Emirates. We now have over 500 government partners, 500 partners, 55 governments are engaged and involved in this. We have 51 sprint partnerships. Now, these are research efforts and initiatives to try to get new technologies and innovation into the marketplace more quickly. We're excited about the opportunity in fertilizer, for example, where we're looking at ways in which we can help farmers across the world understand and appreciate the right rate, the right time, the right place, and the right amount of fertilizer that needs to be applied in order to minimize the environmental impact and maximize production. As part of Aim for Climate, the United States essentially announced recently the establishment of the International Climate Hub. Now, this is patterned off of our domestic climate hubs, where we, over the last 10 years, have been accumulating information about what is being produced and how it's being produced, both from an agriculture and forestry perspective, in various parts of our country, and analyzing the impact of a changing climate, trying to harness that change, trying to figure out how best to acquaint farmers, ranchers, producers, and forest landowners with what they need to be able to do in order to mitigate and adapt to a changing climate. These climate hubs have been incredibly successful. One of them is located here on the Iowa State campus for the Midwest. We're excited about that proposition, so we wanted to expand it to include an international climate hub, to take the information from our Aim for Climate innovation sprints, the 51 efforts to try to promote new innovations into the marketplace, but also to take the information that we learn from our climate smart agriculture and forestry commodity partnership as well on a virtual site that will allow access to researchers and to farmers and to those who are interested all around the world. None of this, of course, it can operate in isolation. And as important as this initiative is, as important as it is to create a new commodity, if you will, a new value-added proposition, new income streams for farmers, it is just a fraction of what we need to do. If we're truly interested in harnessing change, to understand change, we have to continue to invest significantly in research and development. And that's not just the private sector, but it's also the public sector. And I think, frankly, we have been amiss, certainly in the United States and I think globally, in terms of our public research. The private sector has done an amazing job of continuing to invest in new technologies that will allow us to be more productive in the face of a changing climate. But it is important and necessary that the base research that helps to provide new innovation also be conducted at the public level so that it is readily available and readily shareable. That's why it was important for us at USDA to adopt our science and research strategy. To tell the world exactly where our priority areas would be over the next 3 to 5 years, where we would be investing significant resources so that in turn other publicly financed research could align their strategy with our strategy. We are excited about this strategy. We think that there are 5 key priority areas or centers which we think are critically important to our mission at USDA and critically important to this issue of harnessing change and dealing with global food insecurity. We need, I think fair to say, we need to accelerate. Whatever innovation we know works, we need to get it into the field as quickly as possible. Why? Because time is running out on all of us in an effort to try to limit the temperature increase the world will face. And the consequences of that extreme temperature increase could be devastating to agriculture and to many, many, many countries. We need to identify, as I said earlier, climate-smart solutions. While our climate-smart commodity is one initiative, there are other methods for determining how to embrace and allow farmers with information and technology to be able to adapt to their individual circumstance. We need to bolster nutrition security and health. Oftentimes, in settings like this, there is a conversation about food insecurity, and it is an appropriate conversation. It is in light of the fact that there are, in fact, people who are hungry. But I think it is important, and since the introductory to this dialogue was that it should be challenging, well, here's my first challenge to the group. In addition to global food insecurity, we need to also address nutrition insecurity. The reality is one can be fed, but not necessarily fed well. And we think it's important and necessary at USDA to be engaged and involved in improving the nutritional value of whatever it is we're consuming and provide that nutritional information as well to the world. It's one of the reasons why we established recently at Southern University a precision nutrition initiative really focused on trying to figure out how do we really use nutrition in a creative way to reduce the potential of chronic diseases. And to reduce the potential of potential cancers that may result from diet choices. Food security and nutrition security go hand in hand, and any effort for one needs to be for the other. We also think it's important that we continue to look for ways in which we can create resilient ecosystems in agriculture. No better example of that is the current dilemma that we face here in the state of Iowa and the Midwest with HPAI, high path avian influenza. It is a reoccurring challenge that we face. Why? Because there are wild bird populations that fly certain migratory patterns. They have a impact on large-scale livestock operations, poultry operations, turkey operations, and they can create some serious challenges and a serious change for someone who has to basically depopulate their entire flock and then start from scratch. It is a devastating thing that happens to farmers. It's important for us as we deal with this issue of harnessing change to understand and appreciate that these kinds of things will happen. And the question is, how can we equip farmers, ranchers, and producers with the technologies and the techniques to minimize the risk of them happening? How can we make sure that farmers understand the biosecurity steps that need to be taken in every livestock and poultry facility and turkey facility that would minimize and reduce the risk, notwithstanding the fact that we're dealing with wild flocks? This is an important research initiative and effort. It also involves the understanding of the important role of vaccines, potentially in dealing with some very serious diseases that could significantly impact our ability to produce the protein necessary for the world population. Make no mistake, we're going to continue to need more protein. And whether that protein is on the farm or whether that protein is plant-based or whether that protein is in a lab, the reality is we need more protein. And we can't afford a disease, we can't afford this climate crisis to basically interfere with our ability to produce sufficient protein, because we won't get to food security and nutrition security without it. And we think that it's important and necessary that we continue to look for ways by which research can transition from the lab to action in the field. And so it's important for us not only to invest in climate-smart practices, but also to continue an aggressive research initiative. But none of this works. As Norman would say, you take it to the farmer. I'll tell you what, you need to take it to the farmer, and then you need to make the case to the farmer. It's not enough just to take it to him. You got to be able to show that farmer how that is going to benefit him or her. And ultimately, that means, how is it going to impact and affect my bottom line? And so it's important and necessary that we not only create these new innovations, but that we continue to create the marketability of these new innovations. And that gets me to a discussion of trade. The important role of our ability to have a system that's based on science, that's based on rules, that is very predictable, that allows for innovation to come into the marketplace and then to be able to be transferred, if you will, from country to country. It's essential that we continue to promote trade as one of the tools, one of the mechanisms for harnessing the changes that we're dealing with and the challenges we're dealing with. Just today, we announced an additional $1.3 billion coming from the CCC. This is in addition to the $1 billion I announced earlier, that is going to go into our regional agricultural promotion program. Now, this program is designed to equip the USDA to assist our farmers, ranchers, and producers to be able to create new market opportunities around the world with a particular focus on fruits and vegetables. All too often, the focus of trade has been historically on large-scale commodity sales. Fruits and vegetables have oftentimes been left out of that equation. We're going to include them with a specific $100 million that's going to be designated specifically for that purpose. We need to build trust in trade. We need to rebuild trust in trade so that folks understand and appreciate the importance of trade in terms of harnessing change. Having said all of that, let me finish with a challenge that isn't being discussed enough. And it's a challenge that I wish Norman Borlaug was still alive, because I'd love to know how he feels about this. And the best way I can introduce this topic is to talk about a previous Secretary of Agriculture, Bob Bergland, who came from Minnesota. In 1981, he was leaving the office of Secretary of Agriculture, and he had watched change that had taken place in our farm policy in the United States in the 1970s. Prior to that, Henry Wallace's New Deal effort of managing supply, where essentially the government was engaged in sort of regulating how much was grown and how much was stored of various commodities, was in place, which for the most part enabled farmers to do decently well. But over time, it became obvious that we were going to have a different system if the United States was going to work with other developed countries to provide additional agricultural production so that we could begin the process of feeding not just ourselves but the world. So in the 1970s, the decision was made to focus on productivity, to essentially encourage farmers in the United States to, as Secretary Butts once said, plant fence row to fence row, encourage more production. And boy, did people respond to that. Farmers responded to it, the seed industry responded to it, researchers responded to it. The amount of productivity in this country has been enormous. It's just been amazing. But here's the cautionary tale. That as this was occurring, Secretary Bergland suggested that there was a societal issue that had to be addressed. And that societal issue was that as we produce more, the impetus, the momentum, was for larger and larger scale farming operations. And with that, it meant potentially fewer and fewer farmers. And with that, it meant fewer and fewer people living in rural communities across the United States. And with that, it meant potentially a loss of that sense of community that is, I think, somewhat unique to rural places. And in fact, he suggested that we needed to be sensitive to this. Well, over the course of the time since 1981 to the current date, We in the U.S. have lost over 437,000 farms. Now, to give you a sense of how many farms that is, if you took every farmer that's working today on the farm and every farm operation in Iowa and in Minnesota and in Wisconsin and in Illinois and in South Dakota and in Nebraska and in Colorado, you would have the equivalent of 437,000 farms. In addition, 141 million acres of land that was in farming is no longer being farmed. As communities expanded, they expanded to suburbs and beyond, and they took farmland. Now, to give you a sense of how much land that is, 141 million acres is roughly the equivalent of the entire land mass of the state of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Maryland. The challenge here, I think, is for us to figure out whether or not we as a country and then we as a humankind are okay with the consequence of increased production, which is that there will be larger and larger farming operations and fewer farmers and farm families, which means there will be fewer people living in rural communities to support schools, hospitals, and small businesses. Now, why is that important to a country like the United States? Well, in large part because a disproportionate number of the people who serve us in the military, for example, come from those small towns. So the question is, are we okay with that? Or is there a way in which, while harnessing change and increasing productivity and responding to the world challenge of global food insecurity and nutrition insecurity, can't we also figure out ways in which small and mid-sized producers can continue to stay in business and do what they want to do, which is not only to farm, but as importantly, to pass it on to the next generation? With the consolidation of farmland, there also occurred and is occurring a consolidation of farm income. Secretary Perdue was in Wisconsin several years ago. He was asked about this, and he honestly and truthfully said, well, our model here in the U.S. is pretty much you got to get big or you're probably going to have to get out. And the question is, well, how do you get big if the money that's generated from agriculture is being concentrated? Now, this is a challenging thing for you all to think about. Last year was a record year in farm income. It was the best year in farm income in the history of the United States. Never before have we had this kind of income generated by farming, which is the good news. The challenge is that of the income that was generated, if you had an operation where you were selling more than $500,000 of sales each and every year, those farms represent 7.5% of all American farms, and they represent about 150,000 farms out of a little over 2 million. Those 150,000 farms, 7.5%, got 89% of the income, which meant that nearly 2 million farms had to basically share 11%. And the reality is that nearly 50% of our farms, even though they're very small, but they're very important to the people who have them, they didn't make any money at all, they lost money. And nearly 40% made money, but the majority of money they made had to come from off-farm income to support their family. And so as we look at this issue of how we deal with global food security, how we encourage additional production, can we not also think about strategies for ensuring that if you decide you wish to remain small or mid-sized, you can do so, and that the pressure is not so that you have to essentially get out of business? Is there a way in which we can improve and increase the number of income streams coming into those small and mid-sized operations to allow them to have multiple income sources? And that's where the solutions that we're all working on in harnessing the change of climate come into play. If you have a climate smart commodity and it's a higher value proposition, then that farmer can get paid more for the commodity they're growing. If you're measuring and monitoring and verifying the results of that climate practice that farmer has embraced, you not only allow that farmer to benefit from a higher commodity price, but you also allow that farmer to benefit from a ecosystem market payment, a carbon market or water market or biodiversity market payment, a new source of income. If you allow that farmer to take waste product, which may have been over-applied in the past, creating some challenges with reference to water quality, and you are able to convert that by enabling separation technology to capture the water and reuse it, and use the solids to produce that sustainable aviation fuel, you've got a brand new commodity, you've got more processing jobs in rural communities, you've got greater prosperity. If you have the ability of farmers to basically own processing capacity and also benefit from not only production but also processing as part of a local and regional food system, you can actually create a circumstance and situation where that farmer can be climate smart, can be very focused on reducing the miles that food travels, and basically provide additional income for his or her operation. So the challenge for us is to broaden the debate and to broaden the scope of what we're thinking about. And it is not a simple challenge because not only does it apply to the United States, it applies virtually to every country. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to outline the work that's being done, the importance of the work that's being done, and to challenge the folks in this room, the leadership that's in this room today, but as importantly, the young people. It's so great to see the foundation bring these young people together, and I had an opportunity to visit with them for a few minutes today, to challenge the folks who are fellows that we at USDA provide resources to have them think about this future, have them think about the steps that are necessary in their own personal development to be able to help us harness the change and meet these challenges, whether it's a world of conflict or whether it's a world dealing with a climate crisis. I know of no better group, no better operation, no better history or legacy of problem solving than the World Food Prize Foundation. And the people that come every year to Des Moines to discuss, to debate, to dialogue, and then to celebrate those who have thought the big thought, who have challenged, who have worked hard, who have suffered the difficulties and strains of achievement, and yet ultimately are recognized and honored for the work and contribution that they've made. So I hope that I've met the standard of informing and challenging and all of the rest of this dialogue, but I want you all to think about this because, and I'll finish with this, and Terry, you know what I'm talking about because as governor, you understand this, and you were the governor during the 1980s. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There are two conversations that can take place in farms in Iowa and Minnesota and all across the country. The one conversation is with a son and daughter and a dad and mom. I just don't know how we're going to make it. I just don't see how we can do it. You're going to have to leave. You're going to have to go to the big city. You're going to have to take that job. You're going to have to do something different. And, you know, we'll occasionally see the grandkids. We'll occasionally be able to Zoom. But, you know, as good as Zoom is, you can't hug a Zoom. Or you can have a conversation where, regardless of the size, that mom and dad, that granddaughter or granddad and grandma can basically say, you know, we can make this work. You all can live in the house across the road. We can watch those kids, those grandkids grow up. And we can continue to contribute to our community and contribute to our country. And we can continue to do good things for the environment. And we can continue to produce and have the pride that every American farmer and every farmer around the world has of being able to feed their family, their community, their country, and the world. Thank you very much.